The conference room went silent the moment 8-year-old Micah Carter stepped through the glass doors holding his father's hand. Every executive around the polished table turned to stare as if the child had committed some unforgivable crime. At the far end of the room, standing beside a giant digital screen glowing with red warning symbols, CEO Vivian Hale slowly removed her glasses and looked at Ethan Carter with the kind of cold disappointment that could crush a person before a single word was spoken. Outside the towering windows, the bright morning sun lit up the city skyline, but inside Hale Dynamics, the atmosphere felt darker than a storm. Ethan already knew what was coming. He had spent 3 sleepless nights trying to find someone to watch his son, but life had stopped giving him easy choices the day his wife died 2 years earlier. Now the boy beside him squeezed his hand nervously while dozens of corporate eyes judged them both. And within minutes, Ethan would lose the only job keeping their small world alive. Before we continue, if you believe kindness and second chances still matter in this world, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Heartwarming Tales Hub. Your support helps bring more emotional stories like this to life. Ethan Carter had once been one of Hale Dynamics' most respected systems engineers. Quiet, dependable, and brilliant with security architecture, he was the kind of employee who stayed late without complaint and solved problems nobody else could fix. But outside the office, his life had become a daily battle of survival. Since losing his wife Claire to a sudden illness, every day revolved around raising Micah alone. Mornings began before sunrise with rushed breakfasts, school lunches, laundry, and unpaid bills spread across their tiny apartment kitchen table. Ethan rarely complained because he knew his son had already lost enough. Micah was bright, curious, and unusually observant for his age, but grief had made him quieter than other children. He spent hours sketching machines and asking questions about computers while Ethan worked late into the night from home whenever possible. That morning had started badly. The babysitter canceled without warning. The neighbor who occasionally helped was out of town. Ethan had exhausted every option before finally deciding he had no choice but to bring Micah to work for a few hours during a critical company emergency. Hale Dynamics was facing a devastating cyberattack threatening to destroy a billion-dollar merger. Every senior engineer had been summoned immediately. Ethan believed if he kept Micah quiet in an empty office corner, nobody would even notice. But Vivian Hale noticed everything. Vivian was famous throughout the tech industry for transforming Hale Dynamics into one of the most powerful cybersecurity companies in the country before turning 40. Employees admired her intelligence but feared her perfectionism. She expected discipline, precision, and sacrifice from everyone around her because she demanded the same from herself. Her entire life had become her company. Relationships failed, friendships disappeared, success was the only thing she trusted anymore. When she saw Ethan enter the executive floor with a child, embarrassment flashed across her face like a spark hitting gasoline. The board members were already anxious about the security breach. Investors were threatening lawsuits. News outlets were circling like vultures. To Vivian, Ethan's decision looked careless and unprofessional at the worst possible moment. She walked toward him in sharp heels that echoed across the marble floor while Micah shrank closer to his father. Employees nearby pretended to work while secretly watching. Vivian spoke calmly, but her voice carried enough ice to freeze the room. She reminded Ethan that Hale Dynamics was not a daycare. She told him the company was fighting for survival and could not afford distractions. Ethan tried to explain the emergency at home, but exhaustion cracked his voice. He admitted he had nowhere else to take Micah and promised the boy would stay silent. Vivian's expression never softened. Within 5 minutes, Ethan Carter was terminated. The words hit him harder than he expected. He stood motionless while security badges were disabled remotely. Around them, employees lowered their eyes in uncomfortable silence. Micah looked up at his father with confusion he was too young to hide. Ethan nodded slowly, thanked Vivian for the opportunity, and picked up his backpack. He refused to beg. Pride was the last thing grief had not stolen from him. As father and son walked toward the elevators, Micah turned around one final time and glanced at the giant security screen filled with flashing code and warning alerts. Something about the display caught his attention. He stared longer than most adults had. Then the elevator doors closed. By noon, the crisis at Hale Dynamics had become catastrophic. The cyberattack was evolving faster than the company's engineers could contain it. Confidential client data was being encrypted in real time. Millions of dollars vanished by the hour. Every solution the cybersecurity team attempted failed within minutes. Panic spread across the building like wildfire. Investors demanded answers. Board members blamed one another. Even Vivian, who normally remained calm under pressure, felt control slipping through her fingers. Deep inside the attack logs, an invisible backdoor kept reopening the system no matter how many firewalls were rebuilt. Nobody could locate the origin. Meanwhile, Ethan and Micah sat inside a small diner several blocks away sharing fries because Ethan needed to save money. He stared blankly at unpaid bills on his phone while trying to smile for his son. Losing his job meant losing healthcare, rent stability, and probably their apartment within months. Still, he apologized to Micah for the terrible day. But Micah barely touched his food. The boy kept thinking about the security screen he had seen before leaving the office. Earlier that week, Ethan had spent hours working from home while Micah quietly drew beside him. During those long nights, Micah absorbed more than anyone realized. He watched patterns. He listened carefully. He noticed details adults overlooked. Finally, Micah pulled a napkin closer and started sketching symbols with a pencil. Ethan frowned and asked what he was doing. Micah explained that the attack pattern on the company screen looked wrong. He remembered seeing a strange repeating sequence hidden between the warning alerts. According to him, it resembled a looping training simulation Ethan once showed him months ago while explaining how hackers sometimes trick systems into reopening their own defenses. At first Ethan dismissed it gently. But then Micah drew the exact pattern. Ethan's face changed instantly. He grabbed the napkin and stared harder. His engineering instincts woke up immediately. Micah was right. The repeating sequence was not random malware behavior. It was a disguised recursive authentication loop hidden inside the emergency recovery system itself. Every time the company rebuilt its firewall, the recovery protocol secretly reopened access from the inside. The attackers were using Hale Dynamics' own security backup against them. Ethan's heart began pounding. Without another word, he rushed outside with Micah and opened his laptop from the car hood parked near the sidewalk. Using public emergency access credentials still active for a few more hours, he remotely checked the company's emergency logs. Micah had discovered the flaw nobody else noticed. Back at Hale Dynamics, chaos continued consuming the building. Engineers shouted over one another while investors demanded immediate updates. Vivian stood near the operations center feeling the crushing weight of failure settle onto her shoulders for the first time in years. Then her assistant rushed toward her holding a phone. "It's Ethan Carter," she said breathlessly. "He says he knows how to stop the attack." For a moment, pride almost made Vivian refuse the call. But desperation won. Minutes later, Ethan returned to the building with Micah beside him. Employees stared in disbelief as security escorted them back upstairs. Vivian met them near the operations center, exhaustion visible beneath her composed appearance. Ethan wasted no time explaining the hidden recursive loop. Senior engineers initially doubted him until Micah quietly pointed toward a section of code displayed on the massive screen. The boy explained the repeating pattern exactly as he noticed it earlier. The room fell silent. One engineer quickly tested Ethan's theory. Within seconds, the hidden backdoor was exposed. A wave of stunned realization swept through the operations center. Engineers immediately isolated the loop and rebuilt the recovery architecture from scratch. Slowly, system access stabilized. The red warning symbols began disappearing one by one across the giant screens. Servers came back online. Client data was secured. Millions of dollars were saved within the hour. For the first time all day, the building breathed again. Vivian stood motionless watching the recovery happen in real time while Micah sat quietly beside his father eating crackers from a vending machine. The contrast struck her harder than she expected. One moment she had seen them as liabilities. Now she realized the company would have collapsed without them. But what haunted her most was not Ethan's intelligence. It was Micah's face when Ethan was fired earlier that morning. Vivian suddenly remembered being 9 years old herself, sitting alone in empty hotel lobbies while her own father worked endless business meetings. Success had consumed him completely. She spent her childhood believing emotions were weaknesses because nobody around her had time for compassion. Somewhere along the road to becoming powerful, she had become the same kind of person who once made her feel invisible. That realization hurt more than the cyberattack ever could. Later that evening, after the crisis ended and most employees finally went home, Vivian asked Ethan to meet her privately in the executive lounge overlooking the city. The sunset painted the skyline gold while Micah sat nearby drawing robots on scrap paper. Vivian apologized. Not the polished corporate kind designed for appearances. A real apology. Quiet, honest, human. She admitted she had judged Ethan without understanding his situation. She confessed that somewhere between building her empire and protecting it, she forgot people carried invisible battles into work every day. Ethan listened silently, exhaustion still heavy in his eyes. Then Vivian offered him his job back with a promotion leading the company's new cybersecurity division. Ethan hesitated, not because he wanted revenge, but because trust once broken is difficult to rebuild. Before he could answer, Micah looked up from his drawing and smiled at his father for the first time all day. It was a small smile, but after years of grief and struggle, Ethan knew moments like that mattered more than pride. He accepted. Over the following months, Hale dynamics changed in ways employees never expected. Vivian introduced flexible family policies, childcare support, and emergency leave programs for struggling parents. Employees who once feared speaking openly about personal hardships slowly began feeling human again inside the company walls. Productivity improved, loyalty deepened, the culture transformed, and unexpectedly, Vivian changed too. She began spending less time chasing impossible perfection and more time listening to people. Sometimes she even stopped by Ethan's department just to ask Micah about his newest inventions sketched in colorful notebooks. The boy who once walked into the building feeling unwanted had unknowingly rebuilt more than a company's security system. He rebuilt its heart. Before this story ends, take a moment to comment where you're watching from and share one act of kindness you'll never forget. 1 year later, during the company's annual innovation conference, Vivian stood on stage before thousands of employees and investors. Beside her stood Ethan Carter and Micah wearing a tiny navy blue suit that made the audience smile instantly. Vivian told the entire story publicly for the very first time. She admitted her mistake openly and explained how an exhausted single father and an observant little boy taught her the difference between leadership and humanity. The audience rose into a standing ovation. But the moment that truly broke hearts came when Vivian handed Micah a small glass award engraved with the words, "The boy who saved us." Micah looked at his father with shining eyes while Ethan struggled to hold back tears. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the promotions, not the money, not the applause. Because after years of loss, pain, and uncertainty, Ethan finally realized something beautiful. Sometimes life destroys your plans only to place you exactly where you were meant to be. And sometimes the smallest voice in the room becomes the one that saves everyone. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Heartwarming Tales Hub for more emotional and inspiring stories that remind us kindness can still change lives.